Major General Richard Hutton Davies CB was an officer of the New Zealand military forces during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the first New Zealander to command an independent force overseas and one of the most senior New Zealand officers during the First World War. Born in London, he emigrated to New Zealand after leaving school, where he worked as a surveyor. He joined a volunteer militia unit in 1893, and went to South Africa as an officer with the 1st New Zealand contingent sent to the Boer War in 1899. He later commanded the 3rd, 4th and 8th contingents, becoming the first New Zealand officer to command an independent unit on active service overseas. Following his return to New Zealand, he became Inspector General of the New Zealand Military Forces, and in 1909 was attached to a British Army brigade to gain staff experience. This led to him being offered command of 6th Brigade, a regular infantry brigade of British troops. In 1910, he was the first colonial officer to hold such a position. In the summer of 1914, the brigade was mobilized with the British Expeditionary Force, and he commanded it at the Battle of Mons and the First Battle of the Aisne before being invalided back to England due to exhaustion. He was given command of the newly formed 20th Division, which he took to France in 1915, but was relieved of command early in 1916. After a period in command of a reserve centre in Staffordshire, he was sent to hospital suffering from both mental and physical ill health, and committed suicide in May 1918. Early life and family. Davies was born in London, the son of a journalist, and was educated at Hurstpierpoint College. After leaving school, he emigrated to New Zealand, where he spent 2 years working for a relative before settling at Taranaki, setting up a farm and practicing as a surveyor. He married Ida Mary Cornwall in February 1886. They had 2 sons and a daughter. One son, Henry Cornwall Davies, served with the New Zealand Expeditionary Force during the First World War and, like his father, transferred to the British Army in 1915, becoming a captain in the Royal Engineers. Ida died in pregnancy with the 4th child in December 1906. He remarried to Ida's sister Eileen Kathleen Cornwall in May 1908. In October 1887, Davies became the surveyor to the Maunganui Road Board. On the 10th of April 1893, he joined the Hawara Mounted Rifle Volunteers, and was commissioned as a lieutenant in May 1895. He was quickly promoted to captain 6 weeks later, becoming the commander of the unit. He was also active in local government, and in February 1897 was elected a member of the new Plymouth Harbour Board, representing Taranaki North, South Africa. On the 3rd of October 1899, Davies transferred into the permanent force of the New Zealand militia, where he was made responsible for the training of volunteer mounted units. The Boer War, however, was declared a week later. Davies was quickly seconded to command a company of the volunteer 1st New Zealand contingent being sent to the Cape. The contingent sailed on the 21st of October, arrived in late November, and was on active service within a week. Davies was promoted to major in May 1900, and in the same month was given temporary command of the 3rd New Zealand contingent. He was transferred to the Rhodesian Field Force, where he commanded the 4th New Zealand contingent in August 1900. He established a high professional reputation commanding the unit, and was promoted to lieutenant colonel and made a companion of the Order of the Bath, as well as winning the respect of his men. One described him as not only liked but loved. A soldier wrote home calling Davies, who stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, a grand little chap. whilst another noted with pleasure that Davies objected to imperial ideas of discipline being forced upon his men. After being mentioned in dispatches in May 1901, he returned home to command the Auckland Military District, but was ordered back to South Africa in command of the 8th New Zealand Contingent in February 1902, with the brevet rank of colonel. The contingent operated as a single unit, unlike its predecessors, and Davies became the first officer from New Zealand to command an independent force on active service overseas. Military reform. Returning to New Zealand in late 1902, Davies resumed command of the Auckland Military District. He held command until 1906, when he was appointed Inspector General of the New Zealand Military Forces and became a member of the Council of Defence, the body responsible for controlling the Dominion's military forces. The position of Inspector General, newly created that year, was originally expected to go to an imperial, that is British, officer, but the government had announced it planned to rotate New Zealand officers in the role on up to 5-year terms, so as to allow them to gain experience. Davies threw himself into the role, travelling around the country and inspecting local units to gain an overall idea of their efficiency, even under favourable circumstances. However, he found that only 54% of the volunteers attended parades in 1906. At the annual camps, the proportion was as low as 45%. He pressed for greater use of active daytime tactical training rather than evening indoors drill, which he felt was key for a part-time volunteer force, and for a greater emphasis on the training and standards of officers. By the end of his second year in office, he had organized local selection boards for appointing officers, and a central promotion board for senior field officers, as well as mandatory regular fitness and efficiency tests. As a member of the Council of Defence, he strongly supported the movement for universal military training, not conventional conscription, but rather a form of basic military training on a part-time basis for all adult men, arguing that it would mean the flower of the nation would be the soldiers, not the weeds. British service. After 3 years as Inspector General, and in order to gain staff experience, Davies was attached as an observer to a number of units in the United Kingdom in 1909–10. During this time, he also attended the Imperial Defence Conference and represented the New Zealand forces at the funeral of King Edward VII. At the end of the 1-year attachment, he had so impressed the British Army that they offered him an appointment as commander of 6th Brigade in October 1910, with the temporary rank of Brigadier General. As such, he became the first overseas officer to command a regular brigade, only 11 years after taking up a permanent military commission. Davies' tenure in command of 6th Brigade was due to expire in October 1914, when he was to hand over command to John Keir, and it was rumoured in New Zealand that he might be appointed as General Officer commanding the Home Forces in 1915, succeeding Alexander Godley. However, with the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914, his command was mobilized as part of 2nd Division in the British Expeditionary Force and sent to France. The brigade saw heavy combat at the Battle of Mons, where Davies was mentioned in dispatches, but he was quickly worn down by his habit of always marching at the head of his brigade, which put him under heavy physical and mental strain, and from the lasting effects of an attack of pneumonia earlier in the year. One report described him as much changed, full of nerves, very jumpy. He was relieved of command after the first Battle of the Aisne in September and ordered home, being replaced by Colonel Robert Fanshawe. formerly GSO-1 of 1st Division. On the 20th of September, he was appointed a divisional commander, with the rank of temporary Major General, on the 19th of October 1914, and took command of the newly raised 20th Division at some point in September to October. This made him the first New Zealand officer to command a division in the war. On the 18th of February 1915, he was formally transferred to the British Army, and promoted to Major General. The 20th Division moved to France in July 1915, and he commanded it during a minor operation in September, but handed over command on the 8th of March 1916 due to ill health. He was appointed to command a reserve centre at Cannock Chase, Staffordshire, where the arrival of elements of the New Zealand Rifle Brigade in September 1917 meant that he once again had the opportunity to command his own countrymen. He was relieved of command by General Robert Wanner-Sogowan in March 1918, and on the 9th of May 1918, after a prolonged period of physical and mental ill health, he committed suicide at the Special Neurological Hospital for Officers, Kensington.